Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in a waterlogged southeastern Louisiana. I'm going to tell you all right now, I'm sick and damn tired of the word hurricane, tropical storm, coastal flood warning. I'm done. I'm tired of it. I'm finished. As you can see, we're shooting from a different angle tonight. That's because the loft is still full of furniture and other things. Because I refuse to take it back down and up again and back down and up again until all of the storms have decided that they're tired and they're going back to the hill from which they came from. Okay, so we are back this week finally after, actually we're in the middle of a tropical storm right now. Gotta love it, it's beta, yeah. Anyway, we are still here, not treading water at the moment, so it's all good. Hello, Michelle, my love, glad to have you joining in. Hey, Sandra, nice to have you joining in this evening as well. Yes, we are back. So, Ed, nice to see you, sweetheart. Having trouble hearing. Let me move the mic a little closer. Let me know if that helps out any. Give me a heads up. Let me know if you can hear. And a big shout out to all you folks out there on the Edge Radio US and iHeartRadio. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hope you enjoy the show this evening. So, as usual, got to give those shout outs to all of our freaking awesome sponsors. First up and to my right is Hawaiian Island Shine. Yes, this is the stuff I use on Jezebel. This is the Diamond Shine. It's the car wax. It goes on quick, comes off even quicker, and lasts forever. Makes detailing so much easier. It's just keeps your vehicle clean a lot longer and all that good stuff. Hey, Karen, nice to see you. Wait, Cuevas, what's up? Cuevas in the house. So yes, Hawaiian Island Shine. Check out all of their products. Hey, John. But if you only order one or two things, make sure that this is one of the one or two things that you order, because this stuff right here is excellent. Also, if you're waking up in the mornings and you're drinking your coffee and you're not leaving a wet spot, guess what? You're drinking the wrong coffee. Check out coffeeshopofhorrors.com. That's right. You can find them at authorlyngibson.com on my sponsor page. Go shopping. There are 54 plus incredible blends of coffee for your regular coffee maker, for your Keurig, if you like to take the whole beans, whatever, they got it. It's all there for you. Use code EDGE2020 and get 10% off of your entire order. Same code for Hawaiian Island Shine products. Can't beat that with a stick. You could, but it wouldn't do any good. Also, Wrought Ink. Yes, those are our friends over in New Orleans. They create all of these incredible Louisiana Legend t-shirts. Yes, this is the Axeman. I got a drawer full of them. I love wearing these to the Walmart. Go shopping on their Etsy page. You can also find that link at authorlyngibson.com and use code HORRORQUEEN for 10% off of your order. And brand new sponsor, new CBD products. Crescent Canna out of New Orleans, Louisiana. Small company, but growing really fast because they've got incredible products. If you vape CBD, they've got it. If you use the creams or the tinctures, or if you need pet supplies, guess what? They've got all of that too. And for starting out with the Edge Radio US, go shopping at crescentcanna.com. Link is on authorlyngibson.com, and get 30% off of your first order, or off of all your orders. Everything you order there on their site. Use code EDGE2020, 30% off. And these are incredible products. I can't say enough about them. And of course, one of my all-time favorites, Naked Wines. All good wines, all from small mom and pop wineries and vineyards all over the world, not just here in the United States. Incredible products that probably will never see Walmart shelves because they're small time. They like to make sure there's a quality product. Quality over quantity. That's absolutely right. I still got those $100 off vouchers. If you are interested, message me here on Facebook at Southern Horror Queen, or at author Lynn Gibson at msn.com. And I can get you one of those voucher codes. And that way you get $100 off of a case of wine delivered to your door. That's right. You don't even have to go to the grocery store and wait for the fat old ladies to get the hell out of your way down the aisle. No screaming babies. It's incredible. They deliver the wine to your door. Nothing better than opening the door and finding a case of naked wine sitting there waiting for you. That is an incredible Merlot right there. Let's see who else I need to give some shout outs to before we get rolling. Everybody's got to get their creepy fix on tonight. They've been missing all of the madness. Kevin, nice to see you. There's my big brother Glenn over in Texas. Hope all is well with you. What if my brain is clogged? Will the CBD help? It'll make you feel better about it anyway. I don't know if it'll help your brain, but you'll certainly feel better about it. Greg, nice to see you, sweetheart. John said, I gotta order some of your books. I can hook you up with that. Wait until October, John, because I am doing a Halloween special. That's right. Gotta get your scary on. No better time of year to do that other than October. Of course, you can do that January through December, but October is creepy month, right? And we are in October Eve right now because, like, we're in the mid-mark of the month before. So, yes, it is Halloween season because I said so. So, anybody want those books, just hang on a little bit, and they'll be coming out real soon. Somebody else is saying no audio. I don't know what's up with that. Are you guys hearing me okay? I'm hoping so anyway. So, we're going to carry on. So, first up, we're talking about a couple of haunted joints in Mississippi. Yep, that's where I grew up. Ed's laughing, so apparently he heard me. The Bellevue Longfellow House is in Pascagoula, and it was built in 1850. Hey, Ronnie and Lori, if you actually riding along on the coast there in Mississippi, you can see this house from the highway. It's an incredible build. Check it out if you get a chance to. I think it's a private residence still, but check it out anyway. All they can do is pull a gun on you and run you off, and, well, you know, it happens from time to time. So anyway, this dude, Captain Daniel Graham, built it in 1850. And he was not a real nice guy. He was a New Orleans slave trader, and he was a pirate. Well, after the house was finished, Captain Graham goes back out to sea because there was this war going on, and he had to get in on it, right? So he leaves his old lady alone to manage this massive estate. Well, wifey must have needed some CBD oil because she was pretty stressed out. And legend has it that she was a mean, demented bitch, and she had a habit of beating the hell out of her slaves. Sometimes she'd beat them just within inches of their life. Thank you guys for letting me know audio is great. Frank, nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining in. So, anyway, the folks that actually survived the brunt of her little tantrum usually carried some pretty badass scars. It reminded them to stay the hell out of this bitch's arm reach. So, the Civil War comes and goes, and Captain Graham had mysteriously vanished off the face of the earth. Yes, he wasn't wanting to go home. And the missus, yeah, well, she kind of moved on too. There was too many other men out there to torment, so why stick around in that big house by herself? So later on, after she dies, the estate changes hands. A lot. Like, nobody held on to this property for any considerable length of time until after 1902. And that's when it was renovated by the Pollock family. And we all know what happens when scary houses get renovated, right? So in 1938, when Bob Ingalls took it over, if you're anywhere in the region, you're going to recognize this name. He gave it a serious overhaul. Now, Ingalls had just started the Ingalls shipbuilding business. Yeah, y'all know who I'm talking about now, huh? So this dude needed a fancy joint to take all of his little upscale clients to and schmooze them while they talk business and stuff. And he had some pretty impressive guests that hung out with him there too. As a matter of fact, Ingalls changed the estate's name to Longfellow after Henry Wadsworth Longfellow himself stayed there and was inspired enough to write his famous poem, The Building of the Ship. Hey, Wanda Heron, representing Pearl River County, Mississippi. Glad to have you. Good evening to you as well. Gavin is also saying it's no audio, so like no music on the station a little while ago. Yes, thank you. Brandon, nice to see you, my love. Everybody seems to be handling the volume good now, or the audio good now. That makes me happy. So a while later, the Ingalls heirs got a hold of the mansion. So from the 1950s to the 1990s, this estate served as an elite country club that was complete with this 9-hole golf course. Well, after the 90s, the property changed hands again, and it was renovated to a private residence. Now, there's a ton of legends that are associated with this joint. Rumors of hauntings are still circulating among the locals today. As with any old haunted house, there's all these unexplained noises and objects that disappear and pop back up in weird places. And to further fuel the flames, there are also legends that Captain Graham's pirating days were really good, and there's treasure hidden somewhere in or around this estate. Now that there legend has led to a whole lot of hole digging and wall demolition around this property, but nothing's ever been found as far as we know. Hey, Susie Jones, good to see you, sweetheart. So some of the ghosts that hang out there are a little bit on the mischievous side. They get off on opening and slamming doors and sometimes throwing things around. But legend has it that this one ghost, it's supposedly of one of these slaves who Mrs. Graham beat nearly to death and then put out into the woods to die. So this ghost is usually heard moving around in the upstairs part of the home, and he is still pissed. There have been several occasions where he's gotten violent with folks, and he shoved one employee down the stairs and slapped the hell out of another one. Now, Bobby Slaughter was the night manager there when it was a hotel, and she was the one that caught the slap in the face. This is what she had to say when she was interviewed. So she says, the slap was loud enough for people around me to hear it. It was hard enough to leave a handprint on my face. So when Bobby actually first started working there at this hotel, she didn't have any idea about the dark past or any of the haunted legends that were associated with this place. She goes on to say later on in her interview that she was new to the area and she didn't know the stories. She said she went home and told her husband what was going on there, and he was starting to get kind of worried about it because it was a really active place. So she said she would have never actually believed the legends, but it is all quite real because she's experienced it herself firsthand. She said there was this jukebox that would come on at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it would play every morning until 5 o'clock. She said she heard babies crying, toilets flushing, cafe doors opening and closing, and sometimes it would sound like there was a party going on upstairs. She said you could hear these conversations and ice clinking in glasses, but when you got up there, the noise stopped and there was never anybody there. So later on, the property was purchased by Richard Scruggs and his wife Diane, and they restored it and wound up donating it to the University of Mississippi. Then came Hurricane Katrina. That's right, I said the H word again. So the mansion, of course, it was really badly damaged. These folks came along in 2006, Doctors Randy and Tracy Roth, and they decided they were going to buy it and renovate it and turn it into their private residence. Now, there have been no reports since then, but I am anxiously awaiting to hear some of the stories about their experiences in this place, because, the ghosties have been hanging out there for a long time. I ain't seeing them calling the U-Haul truck to move them out. I'm betting they're still there. So next up, there's a couple of old haunted houses in the Columbus area. First of them is the Weaver House, which was built about 155 years ago by this rich merchant. And of course, it was the finest joint back in the day in that little area. So Weaver had this daughter named Nellie, and she was one of these little socialites. She was outgoing, she was very talented, and she lived there from before the Civil War all the way through the 1930s, and she definitely left her mark there. So Nellie had the hots for this fireman named Charles Tucker, and she wound up marrying him in 1878. Well, she was so blissfully happy that she carved her name on the window glass in the south parlor. Well, a few years go by, she has a kid, and Romeo runs off and disappears off the face of the planet. We know how that works, right? So to support herself and her daughter, she starts this small private school, and it was doing okay, but it wasn't making her rich. And of course, the house was massive and required a whole lot of attention, so it was just slipping further and further into disrepair. Well, Nellie continued to live there until she died. She was 80 years old when she passed away. It was an unfortunate event. She was tending the fire in the fireplace, and her dress got a little bit too close to the hearth, and yeah, she caught fire and died a horrific death there. That's awful. So the mansion was eventually rescued, and the Batemans bought the home in 1950. Batemans, not Bates. I know the Bates Motel just flashed through your mind, but that's not the case. Anyway, the house was renovated by the mid 1950s, but during the remodel, a workman leaned his ladder against the window where Nellie had etched her name, and yeah, asshat broke it, so Nellie's autograph was no more, and of course, they installed a new window pane. But check this out. So Miss Bateman's doing a little bit of redecorating, and she puts this new sofa beneath the window where Nellie's etching used to be. Well, later that afternoon, she goes in there and she decides to close the curtains because the sun's beating down on her new couch. So she leans over the couch to grab the drapes, and when she does, she sees that Nellie's name has been put back into the same pane that they just replaced where she had etched it so many years ago. It was etched from the inside, and it was exactly the same handwriting, exactly the same place. So it's pretty incredible that she actually came back and made her mark again. And that leaves us to the Waverly Mansion, not the Nut House in Kentucky. This is the Waverly Mansion in Mississippi, and it's about 6 miles south of Columbus. Now, this mansion was built in 1852 by Colonel George Hampton Young, and he raised his family of 6 boys and 4 girls there, all of which reached adulthood, which was incredible back in the day. So he was so into his family that he had this wedding alcove constructed in his parlor, and most of his kids were actually married there, along with a whole bunch of other folks from the area. Waverly was like the social center of the entire neighborhood, and these folks were hosting all kinds of dances and dinner parties every week. So during the Civil War, a lot of homeless families found a place to stay there at Waverly as well. From 1913 to 1962, the mansion was unoccupied by the living, but it was known to be a very active place for ghosts. In 1962, the Snow family bought the place, and after they dug the front porch from all of the overgrowth and weeds and trees that had grown through it, the renovations started. Now, there's a bunch of stories about the ghosts here. They're said to be friendly with good Southern manners, and they don't really seem to be bothered by the living, yet they are seen and they make their presence known still today. Mirrors inside the mansion are known to reflect the image of the colonel himself as well, which that's kind of creepy. You lean over there to fix your hair, and all of a sudden you see this dude staring back at you. But over the years, when the house was abandoned, tons of folks spotted these apparitions in the windows, or these phantom silhouettes were seen walking around the grounds. One of those was said to be Major John Plitchlin, which was buried nearby, not on the grounds, but nearby to the mansion. Now, this little dude had been orphaned at a young age, and he was taken in by a tribe of Choctaw Indians. His ghost is seen riding a stallion bareback through the estate grounds, just like he did back in the day. Firemen run off, she perishes by fire. Yep, see what happens, Ed? If he stuck around, she'd been okay for a little while longer. So anyway, some folks have heard faint music and laughter coming from the ballroom, but most frequently seen or heard ghost there is that of a little girl that's looking for her mother. You guys check this story out. It's pretty cool. 2 years after moving in, Miss Snow was upstairs when she heard the frightened voice of a little girl about 4 or 5 years old calling out, "Mama!" So she walks across the upstairs balcony and looked down expecting to see one of her kids standing there. Well, she hears the voice again and she looks down, but of course there's nobody there. So for 5 years, she heard this distraught, unhappy little voice calling for her mama. This little girl ghost followed her all around the house house calling out for her mama, and sometimes she even cried all night long. Well, Mrs. Snow's kids would come to her bedroom and they would ask if the little girl was okay. And of course, nobody's seen this kid, they just hear her. Well, on a four-poster bed in an upstairs room, she would often find the impression of this little girl's body on top of the bedspread, usually during the summer months in the afternoon, like she was taking a nap there. Well, one day while she was working in the kitchen, the little girl came and stood really close to her and cried out like she was in pain. So she asked her what was wrong, and she never heard from the little girl again. But her ghost is still around, and Miss Snow keeps her bed made up for her, just in case she wants to take a nap. All right, so I figured while we were back in Mississippi, and since we talked about the Natchez Trace a little bit on the last show, we need to talk about this spot known as Natchez Under the Hill. Now, this little stint was where the deviants went to play, kind of like the red light district across the lake. Anyway, the streets were lined with brothels and saloons, and danger lurked around every corner. And a lot of apparitions remain tied to this area, especially those from the 18th and 19th centuries, because that's when shit was just crazy over there. So there have been tons of reports for decades of a man in a military uniform that's spotted on the nearby bluffs. Rumor has it that he was a spy that leaked information to the Spaniards while they ruled in the area. And maybe it's the shame of his betrayal that keeps him reliving his moments as a traitor. Then there's this ghost of a notorious robber named Joseph Thompson Hare. Now, Hare kept a journal of all the loot he snagged during his stint as a thief, at least up to when he was hanged in the gallows. They say this dude can be heard laughing hysterically along the Natchez Trace. Apparently he's laughing his way to the bank with some of the others poor bastards' cash that he robbed. Also seen along the trace is the ghost of his unfaithful mistress, who he buried alive along with all the jewelry that he'd stole for. Have that bitch. So she's often encountered while offering gold to somebody that could free her from Hare's clutches. Now, Hare isn't the only thieving ghost that you'll encounter here. There's also the apparition of John Morrell. Now, Morrell was a slave trader that was known to sell his slaves, and then he'd steal them back later to sell them all over again. And that worked until they were recognized. At that point, he brutally murdered that slave and replaced him with new ones. So, in 1835, rumors surfaced that Morrell was planning a slave rebellion in New Orleans. The ensuing panic resulted in not only Morrell, but all of his cohorts being lynched. Serve the asshole right. Robert Forrester, glad to see you, sweetheart. Hey, Casey Klein, good to have you joining in. So, three other ghosts that are known to still be hanging around that area today, of course, are the Hart brothers and their deviant associate Samuel Mason, who was known as the Wolfman. We talked about those guys on that last show. Remember the baby killer? Yeah, that's the dude that got his head cut off as a warning to anybody else that decided they were going to show their ass in that area. So yeah, I just thought I would fill you guys in on the Natchez Trace, that part of it anyway. Seems like that whole little stint right there has got all kinds of haunted history and crazy legends attached to it. If you're anywhere in the area, it's well worth the ride to go down there. And just make sure you have plenty of time, because the speed limit's 55 and it's one lane each way. That's like being beat with a wet rag. I hate driving that slow. Anyway, talking about burning in hell, yeah, because that's where the Hart brothers are going to wind up. Or I'm sure they're there, at least some part of them. Let's talk a little bit about SHC. Now, don't panic, folks. That's not some new STD thing. SHC stands for spontaneous human combustion. I know you guys that watch the show have heard of that. That's some crazy shit right there, right? So, for centuries, scientists and researchers have been saying that SHC may be caused by some kind of internalized psychokinetic facet of the human mind. But folks like us say there's always the possibility of ghostly attributes as well. Me, myself, yes, I actually think it's something internal, because I got one hell of a temper, and I know there's been several times where I could have easily burst into flames, but it didn't happen. See, poltergeists too are known to cause spontaneous fires, and there's hundreds of reports of unexplainable lights popping up in haunted houses. And some folks even think that SHC is caused by the wrath of vengeful spirits or malicious entities from other dimensions, perhaps the jinn, Glenn. Whatever the true cause of SHC is, reports of it have haunted men and women for centuries. But there's tons of reports. Ed said most people prefer to have their heads attached. Yes, they do. Janet, nice to see you this evening. So, although it's not really recognized as some kind of medical condition, there's no denying that this shit really does happen, even if we don't understand what it is or why. The most mainstream theory is called the wick effect. So basically, the body, mainly the fat, acts like fuel to the flames. But some folks say that this theory is bullshit. Just think of the insanely high temperatures you need to reduce a body completely to ash. And most of these people who have gone through this, that's basically all that's left. I have, but anyway, let's not go there. Y'all don't need to know what goes on in this twisted little mind of mine. So anyway, obviously more research is needed. But in the meanwhile, here's a few SHC cases that I thought I'd tell you guys about tonight. So this one happened in Brazil on December 16, 2007. Yeah, this ain't something that went down in the 1800s, y'all. There were a shit ton of witnesses, including the police, that saw this chick burst into flames, and she became incinerated in seconds. The chick's face, arms, and upper torso were burned to the point of non-recognition, and she had severe burns on her right leg as well. Bizarrely, her clothing did not appear to be as damaged as her body was. It appeared that she burned from the inside out. One theory was that she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and got struck by lightning. And another theory was that she'd actually been set on fire, some kind of sadistic gang initiation, but there was no sign of any kind of accelerant on her remains or anywhere in that proximity. So I think not. Now, in 2015, this German chick decides to spend the afternoon at the park. Well, apparently it turned out to be anything but relaxing. She's just kicked back and chilling on this bench, and all of a sudden she bursts into flames for no apparent reason. This dude's walking by and he saw the whole thing go down, so he runs over and he tries to smother the flames with his jacket, but she still died from her injuries. This happened in broad daylight and in full view of several witnesses. Unfortunately, many of those witnesses were young mothers and their children. So the chick was thought to have been in her 40s and was well known locally. According to witness reports, she was just sitting on the bench and all of a sudden her body became engulfed in flames, and she was completely silent during the whole thing, leading some folks to suspect that she had committed suicide. There were reports that two men were seen running from the scene in the immediate aftermath, which I don't know if I would have stayed there and watched or ran, and depending on the mood that day. Anyway, they were people that were suggesting that the woman may have been the victim of some kind of attack, but again, that was ruled out because there were no signs of an attack on the victim's remains, nor were there any kind of accelerants found anywhere on or near the remains of the body, which would have caused the fire to start. This one went down in January 2016. So this video pops up on the internet. You guys might have seen this. It's showing this dude just calmly lying down in a doorway in Serbia while flames seem to eat their way out of his body and engulf him. This onlooker's heard asking the dude if he's okay, and he says, "What's happening?" Well, this is some bizarre shit right here. This dude just motions for this concerned bystander to go away as he's laying there calmly with these flames coming from his gut. Even stranger than that, he appeared to stand up and walk away basically unharmed. So according to comments made on social media by people who lived in the area where this footage was allegedly shot, this dude is known locally. He's been involved with some problematic behavior situations in the past. So whether the man used something to set the fire himself or if he was indeed the victim of spontaneous human combustion, it's not really known. But the video itself has been examined, and it has been found to be authentic with no doctoring and no FX and all that good stuff. So then check this one out, y'all. There's this coroner that officially ruled that an Irish dude died from SHC. The official ruling of SHC, interesting, right? So in September of 2011, 9 months after the death of the 76-year-old dude named Michael Faraday, this coroner, Dr. Syrian McLaughlin, ruled that he was the victim of SHC. McLaughlin stated that after investigating deaths for over a quarter of a century, this was the first time that he had ever made such a ruling. Faraday's death baffled investigators. They quickly ruled out that there was an accelerant that had been used. The fire in the fireplace wasn't the cause either. Get this, the fire appeared to have been contained to just Faraday. The only other damage was on the floor and the ceiling directly underneath and above his burned remains. Dr. McLaughlin said that he had not come to his decision lightly, because people in that field are probably giving him hell, but he had conducted extensive research into the subject before coming to this conclusion. He said that his examination of that body, as well as the investigation of the fire itself, left him with no other conclusion that he could possibly draw. Here's another one. This dude had blue flames coming out of his stomach. Larry Arnold has researched and examined a lot of cases when it comes to SHC. And one of his strangest cases was that of Robert Bailey, who was a well-known alcoholic that was found burning to death in this derelict building. Well, people were walking by on their way to work, and they noticed this commotion going on in this vacant house. And when they go in there to see what the hell is going on, they find Bailey on fire, so they called 911 or whatever the case may be. The fire brigade commander named John Stacy, who attended the scene, told Arnold years later that the flames were coming from inside the body itself, and that there appeared to be a slit in the man's stomach where this blue blowtorch-like flame was coming out. It was noted that no other part of the building had been set on fire, and that only the body was burning, although there were some markings on the wooden floor from the heat. Now, the fire crew emptied their extinguishers on Bailey, and eventually it wound up putting out these intense flames, but it was too late to save his life. But aside from Bailey's stomach and torso, no other part of his body or clothes were damaged. Bailey had bitten into one of the newel posts there on the stairs that were made out of mahogany, which is a really hard wood. His teeth were locked down so tight on that newel that a fireman had to pry his jaws open to remove his corpse. Now, this one right here, it may have you considering saving some cash to spend on cremation. Yeah, this dude was reduced to a pile of ash in just mere minutes. Young Seek Kim lived all of his 78 years in Honolulu, and he'd spent most of it paralyzed from the waist down, so he basically just got around in his wheelchair, right? Well, in December of 1956, he was at home when all of a sudden flames burst out of his stomach, quickly spreading in all directions, engulfing him within seconds. So this neighbor named Virginia Cadet quickly runs over to help him, and she later said that he was entirely covered in blue flames. So she calls the fire department, but they get there 15 minutes later, and by then, young Seek Kim and his wheelchair were nothing more than a pile of ash. All that remained of him was just his feet. No other areas in the room were damaged, and once the flames had reduced him to nothing, they seemed to have disappeared instead of spreading everywhere else. The firemen and investigators were just dumbfounded by it, because right there in the same spot where his wheelchair were, there were clothes and books and piles of newspaper that should have caught on fire as well. That didn't happen. Hey, Leanne, nice to see you joining in this evening. So this next dude, which is a rarity, he actually survived SHC. He was a Vietnam War vet named Frank Baker, and he was getting ready to leave for a fishing trip with his friend Pete Willie. Well, suddenly he burst into flames, and he's sitting there on his sofa, just getting up, ready to go fishing with his bud. Well, Willie's freaking out, but he did manage to smother the flames, and Baker appeared to be basically unhurt, just a little bit shaken up. So he goes to his doctor for a checkup, and according to Baker, he was told that it looked like he burned from the inside out. So Baker made an appearance on this show, the Unexplained Files, to go and tell a story. He said that it happened again when he and Willie were out on the lake fishing. Flames just started to overtake his body out of nowhere. They were coming from his torso. Again, with Willie's assistance, the flames were smothered out. Well, Baker is one of the first recorded victims of SHC that actually survived and remained basically healthy. But I'm betting you he keeps his bud Willie pretty close by, or else he spends a lot of time fishing so he can just roll on out of the boat. Now, this next dude, yeah, well, he wasn't that lucky. He didn't make it. Sometime in 2013, this dude, Danny Van Zant's incinerated body was found by his family. It was apparent that the heat and the power of the blaze must have been massive, but there was no other damage to the rest of the wood house that he lived in. A lot of people pointed out that he was a well-known alcoholic and a very heavy cigarette smoker, but physical evidence at the scene showed that neither were the cause of death. Not only was no other part of the home damaged, but there were no signs that a struggle had taken place, which might have suggested foul play. But Van Zant seemed to have just simply gone up in flames. Investigator Ron Lockhart made the point even clearer when he said, you could pour gasoline on somebody and he wouldn't be as badly incinerated. Lockhart also said that he believed there must have been some kind of ignition source, but there was nothing found there, no chemicals, no trace of anything. So, yeah, they were suspecting spontaneous human combustion, and it was never officially ruled out. It's like they were just scared to go on and say, yeah, that's what caused it. Hey, Christina, nice to see you, dear. And then there's this little dude that he really could have been Hellboy. So by the time Raul was 3 months old, he had already burst into flames 4 times. 3 months old. What the hell kind of stress could a 3-month-old have, right? That kind of takes the whole temper thing out of the loop for me, right? So at least according to reports that surfaced in 2013, this kid had his first experience with SHC at only 9 days old. His terrified mother just watched on in horror as her newborn son is engulfed in flames for no apparent reason. The doctor that worked his case stated that combustible gases released from the patient's pores may have been responsible for Raul catching fire out of nowhere. What the hell were you feeding this kid? 9 days old. Anyway, the only advice that was offered to the parents was to make sure that anything flammable was kept away from this child, including any clothing or diapers. So it's expected that as Raul gets older, he will undergo some plastic surgery to fix the damage from him catching on fire. Perhaps the most chilling aspect for these frantic parents was the fact that the doctor couldn't be sure, of course, that it wouldn't happen again. And then there's this one, where the big dogs were called in. The FBI report clearly states that 67-year-old Mary Reeser fell asleep while smoking a cigarette in her chair. She was groggy from 2 Seconal tablets she'd taken earlier, and she accidentally set herself on fire. Reeser burned to death. It was thought that Reeser's own body fat had further fueled the fire. However, numerous researchers and writers have dismissed this report over the years. They state that the fact that all that remained of Reeser was a foot and a skull fragment and a piece of her spine, as well as only the springs of the chair that she was sitting on. That would have meant this fire had to have burned at an intensely high heat. There should have been damage throughout this entire building, but there wasn't. That didn't happen. Only the spot where Reeser had been sitting was damaged by fire in any way. Even a pile of newspapers that was stacked right next to her chair was left completely unscathed. It was even noted in the initial investigation that there wasn't a heavy aroma of smoke that would be expected in a house fire that got hot enough to reduce a human body to ash. Mary Reeser's case is one of the most famous regarding the phenomena of spontaneous human combustion. Yes, we had to do that. It's been a while. Audrey Jeffries, nice to see you, sweetheart. Glad to see you tuning in. Hope everything is good for you up there in Kentucky. Here's to you, dear. Oh, that is so yummy. All right, so I figured since we're already talking about shitty ways to die, we might as well throw some serial killers into the mix, right? It's been a while. We hadn't got our serial killer on in like forever. So I thought Ed Kemper, aka the Co-Ed Butcher, would be a great serial killer story to start out with tonight. So let's talk a little bit about Kemper. As a kid, he was abused by his mother, which is typical of serial killers, right? So he moves in with his grandparents, who later on he murders. He's actually one of 5 serial killers who inspired the character of Buffalo Bill in the novel that became the film, The Silence of the Lambs. The others, of course, were Ted Bundy, Ed Gein, Jerry Brudos, and Gary M. Heidenreich. Yeah, so Kemper was this huge and incredibly smart dude, and that, of course, made it damn near impossible for his victims to get away from him. This freak was 6'9", and had an IQ of 145. At the age of 15 in 1964, Kemper murdered his grandparents and was sentenced as criminally insane to some juvenile detention center in California. So, even though he'd been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic, he eventually convinces the doctors that he'd recover and he was no longer a threat to society. So, he's released on parole on his 21st birthday. And he goes out and he gets his job with the California Highway Department. Well, after a while, he starts building these kits that consisted of plastic bags and knives and blankets and handcuffs. Now, keep in mind, this sucko is working with the Highway Department and it's in the 70s. So every day he's watching these chicks hitchhike their way across the country. In fact, he later admitted that he had picked up at least 150 of these chicks before he gave in to his sadistic sexual urges. But between May of 1972 and April of 1973, Kemper goes off on a serial killing spree. He'd lure these chicks to his vehicle, murder them, then he'd take their corpses home with him to defile and mutilate. Yeah, y'all saw that coming, right? Well, way before Jeffrey Dahmer came around, Kemper was keeping the severed heads of his victims as trophies. He killed by shooting, stabbing, smothering, or strangling his victims. Then he would take their bodies home, where he would dismember them and have sex with the head. That gives a whole new meaning to the words head job. I said that out loud, didn't I? Anyway, when he was done with them, he'd put the body parts into plastic bags and he'd haul them off to remote areas to dump them. So, after killing at least 6 girls in over 11 months, Kemper bludgeoned his mother to death in her sleep with a claw hammer. Then he slit her throat, decapitated her, and he had sex with her head, which was later used as a dartboard. Because why the hell not, right? Well, later on he tries to put the head down a garbage disposal, but it spit it back out. So, after having sex with his mother's dead body again, he invites over one of her best friends who he murdered and then spent the night with the body. Dead late. Kemper takes off in his car for Colorado, but called the police to confess the last of his 2 murders. Well, they thought he was full of shit. They didn't take this call seriously, and they told him, call back later, dude. So he calls an officer that he knew personally, and he confessed to 8 murders. He said that he had turned himself in because emotionally he couldn't handle it much longer. And he was at the point of near exhaustion and collapse, and he just said, the hell with it. Obviously, right? So at his 1973 trial, he was deemed sane and found guilty. He requested the death penalty, but California had temporarily suspended capital punishment, so instead he gets 8 life sentences. So your tax dollars are paying for this dude to have his Salisbury steak and internet. How does that make you feel? Kemper was given several interviews over the years, and of course, he's got one hell of a story. And if you Google him, you'll see all kinds of journal photographs and headlines and stories written over this dude. Anyway, he personally rejected parole in 2007 and 2012, and now, in his olden age of 60 something, almost 70, he'll be eligible again for parole. But the parole board said that he just really isn't fit to rejoin society. So apparently they've woke the hell up. Then there's Patrick Kearney, aka the trash bag killer, who was bullied as a child because he was nerdy and undeveloped. Well, Kearney began with being one of these withdrawn teenagers who fantasized about killing other boys. Well, it seems old boy actually made a name for himself. Anyway, he is now known to be among the 10 most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. Kearney preyed on men in California during the 1970s, and he disposed their bodies in a way that earned him the name the trash bag killer. He's also one of several American serial killers known as the freeway killer, because that's where he dropped off all of his victims. So, Kearney may have killed as many as 43 people before his arrest, including an 8-year-old boy. He confessed to murdering his first victim, a 19-year-old man, in 1962. Kearney preferred men who were taller and heavier than him. He convinced his first victim to ride on his motorcycle with him, takes him to a remote area where he shot him, of course right in the head, and then he sexually assaulted the body. He murdered several more men the same way before he met his young lover, David Hill. So when they argued, Kearney would go out for these long drives. And of course, while he's out there on these long drives, he's picking up other male hitchhikers or dudes at gay bars, and he's killing them. This sadistic bastard loved to inflict pain and torture in his victims before he actually murdered them. So he'd cut their stomachs open, and then he'd have sex with the bodies, and after that he would mutilate them and dismember the remains with a hacksaw before tossing them on the side of the road, and then later on into canyons and landfills or deserts, or just any old where he decided he could hum a trash bag out of his vehicle. So Kearney made a full confession to 28 murders and later on to 7 more. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to plead guilty to 21 and, of course, received 21 life sentences. He's now 77 and is residing comfortably in the California State Prison. Gotta love that. More tax dollars at work. One bullet, but no, he's been in there for 40 years. Quite a while anyway. Yeah, you guys just keep feeding him those steaks, and yeah, I'll leave that alone because that makes me angry. It makes a whole lot of people angry. It's time for some naked wines. Good evening, Glenn. Nice to see you. Apple pie, Glenn. So, then there's this little ray of sunshine too. His name's Richard Francis Cottingham, and he is known as the Torso Killer. Cottingham was born in the Bronx, so he was the oldest of 3 kids of an insurance agent and a housewife. Well, when his family moved to New Jersey, he was 12 years old. Another nerdy kid with bad eyesight that wasn't good at sports, and he had trouble making friends. And, of course, after school, he got his ass kicked quite frequently. But eventually, he becomes a computer operator at his father's insurance company. So Richard Cottingham was 21 years old when he committed his first murder. In 1967, he strangled Nancy Vogel, who was on her way to a church bingo game. Then he dumped her nude, bound body in a park. At 23, he married his wife Janet, and they have 3 kids before their divorce 9 years later. In 1972, he was charged with robbery and sexual assault, but those charges were dropped. Pay attention to these dates, folks. Between 1977 and 1980, Cottingham is suspected to have killed up to 100 women, although police identified only 5 murders and another 4 attempted murders. In December 1977, he abducts this nurse named Mary Ann Carrier from her apartment parking garage. He takes her to a nearby motel, tortures her, and kills her. And then in that following March, Cottingham drugged Karen Schilt in a bar. He left with her, raped her, and left her for dead in a sewer, but she survived. Unfortunately, because she was drugged, she couldn't really remember what happened to her. 1979, Cottingham drugged and raped a hooker, Susan Geiger. She survives, but 2 months later, he strikes again. This time, Cottingham picked up 2 hookers and took them to a New York travel lodge where he tortured and killed them both before he removed their hands. He set the hotel room and the bodies on fire, except for the parts that he took with him. Not spontaneous human combustion. So in May of 1980, police found the body of a 19-year-old Valerie Street in the New Jersey Quality Inn. Her hands were tightly handcuffed behind her. She was covered in bite marks and she'd been beaten across the shins. Police linked the crime to an earlier murder at the same motel. On May 15th that year, another chick was stabbed to death and had her boobs cut off, and then her body burned in a Manhattan motel. Also in May was very busy. Cottingham takes prostitute Leslie Ann Odell to the Quality Inn in New Jersey, where he had murdered Valerie Street. While he was torturing her, the staff hears her screaming and they call the police. So officers find handcuffs and duct tape and leather S&M gear and a toy gun and a knife and a tranquilizer. Well, Cottingham tells the police that he'd paid Odell and what he had been doing was consensual, but as he was held in custody, police start investigating. And they match his fingerprints to one of the handcuffs on Valerie Street's body. And his apartment, they decide they're going to go over there and search it. Jackpot. They start finding all these trophies like jewelry and other belongings that were once property of his victims. So Cottingham was eventually convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to 100 years in prison. He's currently incarcerated in New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. Now, that's tragic that he was only convicted of 5 murders when he's suspected of having killed 100 different people, 100 human lives. That is insane. Granted, 100 years in prison. Yes, he's going to die in there. Should die real quick at the end of the rope, or with a bullet, or something quicker and a lot more cost effective. But anyway, it just seems like he should have been, convicted of a lot more than that. Okay, so we're going to do one more, and then we're going to call it a wrap for the night. There's always next week at 7 Central and 8 Eastern Time. You can tune in right here on Facebook at Southern Horror Queen or on iHeartRadio, the Edge Radio US. That's right. You should be listening to the Edge Radio US anyway. There's a free Android app. This is some badass rock and roll, streaming live in 104 countries. 50,000 listeners per minute because they have good taste. They know good music when they hear it. So, then there's Elmer Henley, who's serving 6 life sentences in a Texas prison after being involved in the rape, torture, and murder of up to 27 teenage boys. Henley, a.k.a. the Houston mass murderer, grew up with an alcoholic father that beat his wife and his other 4 brothers. His mother was a strict and religious person, and she was insistent that her sons receive a good education. His parents divorced in 1970 when Henley was 14 years old, and the former superior student dropped out of high school. At the age of 15, he became acquainted with this dude, Dean Coral, which was a Houston candy store owner. He was also a homosexual hustler, thief, and sadistic serial killer. This dude named David Brooks was an associate of Coral and kind of had befriended Henley, so they just kind of all sucked up together in one foul and demented organization. So at the age of 15, he became acquainted with this dude, Coral, and Coral offered to pay the boys for organized burglaries. He asked Henley if he would be prepared to kill, to which the 15-year-old replied, yeah, okay. So it's 1971, and Henley became aware of a number of disappearances of boys in his neighborhood. over the past 6 months, 8 boys aged between 13 and 17 had just disappeared off the face of the planet. So Coral told Henley that he worked for this organization which recruited boys for homosexual slavery rings. And he offered Henley $200 for any boy that he could bring to him. So Coral suggested Henley and Brooks go and lure these victims over to Coral's apartment where Henley would trick them into being handcuffed. So Henley cons his first victim with the promise of smoking a weed with him, and he watched Coral take the handcuffed kid, tie up his feet, tape up his mouth, and he leaves with his $200 thinking this kid's going to be sold to a slavery ring. But later on, he found out otherwise. By 1972, Henley was assisting Coral in the abduction and murder of several young men. On October 2nd, 1972, Wally Semino, 14-year-old kid, and this dude Richard Hembry, 13-year-old kid, were abducted off the streets near their homes. Semino tried to call his mother from Coral's house, but the phone was cut off. So Henley assisted Coral in the boys' rape, torture, strangulation, and after their bodies were buried in Coral's boat shed, it was pretty much a done deal. By late 1972, Henley and Brooks had assisted in the rape, torture, and murder of at least 9 teenage boys. In 1973, Henley tried to join the U.S. Navy, but he was rejected because Uncle Sam knows an idiot and an insane man when he sees one. On June 4th, a friend of Henley's called Billy Lawrence told his father he was going on a fishing trip with his friends. Well, he never came home. But like the parents of some of these other missing boys, Billy's father gets this note in his son's handwriting, and the note says that he had found a job in Austin and that he'd be home soon. Well, Billy Lawrence was raped and tortured over a period of 3 days and then strangled with a cord and buried in a lake. 2 weeks later, Raymond Blackburn, 20 years old, meets a similar fate, and 2 weeks after that, a 15-year-old boy named Homer Garcia joins him. The killing spree continued, and these two boys are just losing their shit. Coral should burn in a whole different kind of hell for doing this to these kids. But anyway, 2 more kids, John Sellers and Michael Bollock, were killed on July 12th and July 19th. And 6 days after that, Henley lures his friends now, Charles Cobble and Marty Jones, into Coral's apartment. After 2 days of torture and abuse there, Cobble was shot and Jones was strangled, and both of those were buried in Coral's boat shed. The bodies were covered with lime, of course, to aid in the decomposition. On August 3rd, Brooks and Coral, but not Henley, abducted 13-year-old James Dramelia, and they strapped him to Coral's torture board. Days later, Dramelia was also buried in Coral's boat shed. There ain't no room for a boat in this boat shed. August 7, 1973, Henley lured another potential victim with the promise of a party. But before Coral could secure 19-year-old Timothy Curley to his torture board, Henley takes him from the house to go buy a sandwich. So the two of them come back and they got this chick, Rhonda Williams, a 15-year-old girl with them. This infuriated Coral, and he told Henley that he had ruined everything by bringing a female into the apartment. Coral allowed these 3 teenagers to drink and smoke weed until they fell asleep, and then he bound them and gagged them all. Coral drags the handcuffed Henley aside, and he threatens to shoot him. So Henley pleads for his life, and he promised to participate in the torture and murder of these other 2 kids. So Coral uncuffs him and then ties Curley and Miss Williams to either side of his plywood torture board. He hands Henley a hunting knife and ordered him to go cut off Miss McWilliams' clothes, saying that he could rape and kill her while he took care of the boy. So Coral places this pistol on the bedside table and he climbs on top of Curley. As Coral starts to assault and torture Tim Curley, Henley begins cutting away Miss McWilliams' clothes with his knife. Well, McWilliams lifts up her head and asks Henley, "Is this for real?" And that's when he says, "Yeah, this is happening. This is really going down." So the chick looks back up at him and says, Are you going to do anything about this? So at that point, Henley snapped and he grabs the pistol from the table and he tells Coral to stop what he's doing, that he's gone far enough. So Coral's like, "What the hell's going on with you, dude?" He walks over towards Henley and he starts screaming, "Kill me, you won't do it." So Henley proved him to be a liar, and he takes a couple shots at Coral's forehead, but he winds up hitting him twice in the shoulder. So he pulls the trigger 3 more times, and eventually one of those bullets hit him in a spot that caused him to lose his life. So with Coral laid out on the floor, he lets these other 2 victims go, and then he calls the police. He told them everything. He even wrote a confession and led them to the bodies in the boat shed, to the bodies at Lake Sam Rayburn and a few other spots too. So police find the remains of 29 victims. Several of them to this day still remain unidentified. Henley was charged with only 6 murders, and at his 1974 trial, a jury deliberated for just under an hour to convict him. His conviction was overturned on appeal in 1978, but he was convicted again the next year and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. He's been denied at each parole hearing, and his next eligible parole date is in 2025 when he will be 69 years old. How tragic, right, folks? All right, so we're going to call it a wrap for tonight. You had your haunted history. We talked about the Natchez Trace a little bit more. We did some spontaneous human combustion. And we got caught up on some serial killers as well. Thank you guys so much for joining in. Remember to check out authorlyngibson.com. Wait till October. There's going to be a Halloween book sale coming up real soon. You can find details about that on my website as well as my Facebook pages, so make sure you stay tuned into that. Thank you guys for joining in, and I will see you back here pending no hurricane or tropical storms or other freaking natural disasters next Tuesday night at 7 Central and 8 Eastern Time. You guys have a fantastic weekend.